It's Friday, February 24th, 2017.
Today we're going to be talking about
Speed traps,
Islamophobia in Canada,
the South Sudanese famine,
and Valve's theme service. I'm Bandringer.
And I'm the Dino Man.
And this is
the Broke Canadian Newscast.
They're two guys with more time than money to spare, discussing local to world affairs. There's Bandringer first with the Dino Man last. Here's the Broke Canadian Newscast.
So how's your week been, Christian?
How's my week been? It's been a good week. No, it's been a very good week. Yeah, kind of same old work and fun stuff, but
Yeah.
nothing really big happened other than something that we'll talk about later.
Oh, that's a tease.
Ooh, it's a tease.
Making you watch further in.
Or listen further in. If
Yes.
it's not the YouTube video.
I mean, really just listen, though.
Yeah.
Because the
Well,
YouTube...
hey, they could stare at our beautiful artwork.
Our beautiful artwork?
Oh, mine and your wife's beautiful artwork.
Hey, don't talk about my wife that way. Okay, that was weird. Anyway, I had a good week as well. Last evening, fairly late night, I watched a fairly delightful episode of a show called Dreamland. You ever heard of this show?
Dreamland? No.
It's a very obscure thing. It's on Netflix, though. It's
So like Once Upon a Time?
no, it's an Australian show.
Mm.
It's
How many of the actors are named Bruce?
none of them, I don't think. But it's like kind of like The Office. But if The Office met with Yes Minister, you know Yes Minister?
Yes.
Okay, so it's set in this government association called the Nation Building Authority.
Yeah.
It follows a bunch of urban planners.
It's modern setting?
It's modern setting, and it's just what they deal with as far as bureaucratic nonsense. Like, the main character is very much like the main character in Yes Minister, in that he's a sympathetic character that's kind of always sabotaged by the more... In this case, it is a bureaucrat, and it's sabotaged by this guy who's, I think he's the liaison to, like, the actual government and the politicians.
Oh, okay.
So, like, they have, like, this thing that they have all planned, but then the politician is just like, no, we can't do this because we're going to lose a by-election. And then he's like, oh, it's kind of funny.
Neat.
That's probably way too long. Anybody wanted to talk about that, but,
Hey, it's as long as you wanted to talk about it, and that's the important part, right?
yes, screw the audience.
Screw the audience.
I think we should first get into an update of a story we talked about a few weeks ago, and a little bit of a preview of some topics we'll be talking about in the forthcoming weeks.
Yes. So, to update, we did do a story a few episodes back. Was it our first one? Or no, second one. I think we talked about the fentanyl crisis.
Yes.
And there has been an update in terms of, we did mention some of the strategies that the government employs to try to ameliorate the crisis.
Yeah.
Well, in Edmonton here, they've just announced 4 downtown safe injection sites.
Yeah.
To be open. Now, granted, there's a little bit of blowback from people, considering that there's still issues in the suburbs, and research shows that people don't go more than a kilometer to reach these. But it's definitely a step. It's for sure a step.
It's a step. More steps do need to be taken, but it is a step. There also have been calls for the government of Alberta to declare a public health emergency, just like the BC government has, but that has not been taken up by the government yet.
No.
Also, we have a few other stories that just whet your appetite on some things that we'll be covering in the forthcoming weeks. As we said at the top, we're going to talk about Islamophobia this week. And next week, definitely on the docket, is talking about the refugees that are sneaking across the border. And it's going to be a bit of a follow-up to the Safe Third Country agreement discussion we had earlier, with a bit more about this specific issue.
We won't go into anything now, but yeah, that will be what we were talking about.
We'll also be talking more in-depth on Russia, specifically their involvement in the Crimea.
Yeah, we'll also be talking about a fiscal update in local news. We've been, unfortunately, spending too much local news away from home. So, given that that's something that's been more recently breaking, we hope to be able to cover it next week and hopefully not bore you guys all the tears.
Yeah, specifically the Alberta government fiscal update,
Yes.
which was very recently announced. As well, because we can't stop running into people from Gamergate. They just keep on cropping up in the news. You may have heard that our favorite Milo Milo
Yiannopoulos, yeah.
Yes. Got into a little bit of hot water recently, and that's been all over the news, that is something we'll cover in the next couple weeks.
And I'm almost assured that we will throw it in news that doesn't matter, because, let's be honest, as much as he's a public figure...
True enough. Probably be one of our meteor news that doesn't matter for sure. You all know what we're talking about, so I won't even go into more detail.
Let's just cut to local news.
Let's do it.
Alright, so speed traps. You guys might have seen this pop up in local news. The 21st, the second person who actually got fined for a stunting ticket popped up in the news for holding up a sign warning people about photo radar in Edmonton. Now, the first guy, this was way back, almost a year ago, but this guy, what's his name? Salim El Dakashi. I'm probably butchering that.
You are most assuredly butchering that.
Yeah, it's okay. Anyways, he got fined $543 for stunting. And this is, once again, brought to light the kind of persistent issue in Edmonton about the argument over speed traps, specifically usually automated photo radar, but it kind of spreads everywhere.
Yeah.
So I guess we can talk a little bit about these two, but to first go into it, it's fairly common in Edmonton. I don't know how many sites they have up right now, but it's not unheard of to come across speed traps. They often have the big signs up that say, big ticket event. I think we just had one this past weekend because it was a long weekend.
Yeah.
And they go out and force to send out unmarked vehicles and stuff to go ticket people.
Unmarked vehicles, boxes, photo, all that kind of stuff.
So, in response to this kind of thing, there have been a lot of public outcries against it. Granted, some of it isn't valid, but a lot of the arguments kind of go into the realm of saying it's a money grab, or saying that it's unfair in terms of the thresholds that they have, or just going so far as to say that the speed limits posted are too slow and we should just raise them.
Okay. Well, first off, let's go more granular, and then we'll zoom out from there.
Okay, sure.
Let's look specifically at stunting and warning people about photo radar. Obviously, it's against the law. Did two tickets have stood for this? Yeah. I don't think it's an incredibly common thing. People warn people about photo radar tickets all the time. If you're driving on the white mud, the guy in front of you, if there's a photo radar or a police thing that's at all obvious, everyone's going to slow down.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will even, pump their brakes to, flash the lights. It's very common online. People warn people about where photo radar sites are all the time. It's fairly common. What is uncommon, I guess, is for people to be this obvious about it, standing by the side of a road with a handwritten sign, and for people to get caught for it and arrested. Or not arrested, but fined. Yeah. More specifically.
Now, granted, the first case that happened a year ago, one of the reasons they actually nailed him, as I understand, is that he actually had a foul language written on the back of his sign.
Yeah.
And it just said radar ahead. And this guy, I don't think, had anything like that. But you could argue, yes, this isn't a proper use of the stunting kind of fine. Mm-hmm. But the point remains that the way the police see it is if people know specifically where the photo radar is, there's a massive slowdown there, which actually can be more dangerous.
Yes.
And then, as soon as they pass it, they go right back up to speeding, which defeats the entire purpose of it in their mind. Now, you may argue that automated photo radar that you hear about later isn't useful, but this here definitely defeats the purpose of photo radar. So it's no surprise to me that the police are finding a way to counteract this.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. It seems like stunting is a fairly obviously it's a very vaguely defined law where it gives the police a lot of leeway in order to find things that they find dangerous, which has its pros and cons for sure. On the pro side, if you have things that are not specifically against any specific laws, but are obviously dangerous, you have something that you can charge somebody with. For example, a good example of this is that there's no law against having 8 people in a car that seats 6, as long as everybody is wearing a seatbelt.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have 20 people in that car, you can charge them for stunting, because that is obviously ridiculously unsafe.
Yes.
So there is a pro side to having a fairly vaguely defined law. The con is that it can be used just at the discretion at the officer for possibly inappropriate uses.
This reminds me actually of another story that popped, I think it was a few weeks ago. And there was a person who got up arms in Facebook and got a bit of news coverage for having a cracked driver's license and getting a fine for that. And what actually came out after the fact is there were witness testimonies and the officer who stopped him. He was driving incredibly dangerous. Now, he wasn't inebriated, but he was incredibly tired and was basically driving like he was under the influence. And the officer there used his discretion and decided he thought he should cut the guy a break. Mm-hmm. And because if he gave him, like, impaired driving or whatever...
Impaired driving or dangerous driving.
Dangerous driving. There would be something on his license. And so he gave him a cracked license, which was also a much smaller fine.
Yeah.
And basically had to give the guy something. Let the guy go home. Also, if they gave him a dangerous or impaired driving, they'd have to impound the vehicle.
Yeah.
So he let the guy continue on his home, but he felt like he had to do something. This guy got up in arms because he said, "Oh, there's a tiny crack in my license. Why am I getting fined for this?"
Yes.
And the police basically came out and said, "No, we were ready to give you something much worse and try to let you off easy with this discretionary kind of decision."
Yes.
I mean, my vehicle currently has one of the headlights is out. I could technically get stopped and in trouble for that, but they probably would only stop me in those cases if something else was dangerous and they needed something that they could pin on me.
Yeah. With the discretionary laws like that are useful, but they can be abused.
Yeah.
You very often hear stories of it being abused towards minority communities and those type of laws being leveraged against those communities.
So carrying on from here, we did mention that there was a public movement against it. Mm-hmm. It should be noted that the group has sent out, almost 13,000 people in Edmonton, specifically, for alerts about laser traps. So there is a fairly big public outcry. However, I guess the city of Edmonton has reacted to these. Now, back in 2014, there was a big post posted by Don Iverson, our current mayor, which basically defended speed traps. Now, one of the things he said here is he brought up a lot of the stats about injuries and such, and in his initial post he didn't back any of this up, but he has since done that. But he brought up the idea that, we gotta slow down. Edmonton's roads are not just used in the winter or the summer, but the winter and the summer. Yeah. So the speed limits have to reflect that.
Yeah.
Right? That's one of the biggest arguments for not increasing the white mud speed limit, by the way. And he brought up that really what it comes down to is a limit is a limit. Like, look up the definition. You are not to go over it. Mm-hmm. And now, in the past, we have had this, buffer past the limit that people have gotten used to. And yes, it's been there basically because the things were less precise and it was harder to nail people, especially if you're talking way before even any sort of accurate measurement. It's just based off of the cop, right?
Yeah.
But now that we have ways of, and it's been proven, accurately measuring somebody's speed, we can ding them for 1 kilometer over and know that they were legitimately going 1 kilometer over. Now, I think there's still discretion. I believe there still is a buffer for the police-managed ones, but the automated speed trap has a much lower buffer.
Yes.
Now, this has gotten a lot of people's craw, because they'll get tickets for 3, 4, 5 over. But according to Don Iverson, one of the things he notes is, technically, you are still going over the limit. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, if you are driving, you should be able to control your vehicle to a decent degree. Yeah. Especially now that most modern cars have cruise control and the like in them.
Despite this, pretty much everyone goes 10 kilometers over, at least on the white mud.
Yes.
Mind you, none of those people are really getting tickets all that often.
No.
Unless they're going, 15 to 20 over, which I might have once and gotten pulled over. But
we'll get into that later.
We'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah. So when Don Iverson posted this and edited it, he actually brought up 2 studies. And these studies I looked at and are actually rather interesting.
Okay.
Because these studies are conducted by somebody at the University of Alberta and are trying to correlate speed enforcement with collision rates, specifically high impact, high speed collisions, as well as serious collisions, as opposed to ones that don't only do property damage. So these 2 papers that I read, that were both done by this same individual, had found that there was actually a correlation in both automated and with the ones with the police presence. In both those speed traps, their presence actually helped to reduce these collision rates. Which, assuming that their data, now granted, I didn't go fully into it, and there could be some shenanigans played with the stats, to make something work. As both of us were in science, we know that that happens a fair bit to try to get a result that's significant that you can publish.
In organic chemistry, you can almost never reproduce the yields that they show in papers, because that yield, if you try it 25 times, once you'll get that yield, the other 20 times you'll get nothing, 4 times you'll get half that yield.
So yeah, you're running into problems like this. So that is a legitimate argument against this paper. However, the paper, it is true. That is what it's saying.
Yeah.
And
that's what the data we have says.
That's what the data we have says. Now, in terms of other government responses, I went straight to the City of Edmonton Photo Enforcement FAQ, and this is one of the biggest complaints about it is how the money is spent, right? The whole money grab argument. Now, the way they disclose the information is, first of all, the police service received $18 million from automated enforcement, right?
It's not actually all that much.
That's not that much, exactly.
You think about it, with a population of, say, 1 million, make math easy.
Yep.
So then, and on average, each person pays $18 a year in traffic tickets. That is not that much, especially given that your average ticket is at least $100.
Oh, yeah. So 15% of this, the fines, go to victim services, which can't really argue against that.
Well, and that'll directly, basically fund the kinds of things that speeding can lead to, you know?
16.7% goes to the government itself.
The Alberta government.
The Alberta government.
Not the Edmonton government, which manages the police service here.
Yeah. And the final remaining fine goes into a reserve fund, and it's used for safety and community projects, and they're only to be used with traffic things in mind.
Okay.
Now, one of the arguments that you could make that this is still a money grab is that the city then can allocate fewer funds to these community projects and these traffic projects, and therefore use kind of by proxy have the money.
Yes, but at very least 30% of this is not going towards the Edmonton Police Service.
Yes.
Because the Edmonton Police Service is funded by the City of Edmonton.
Yeah. Any late fees go to the province. But yeah, that's how the money is distributed, as they say. So a lot of this it's not specified exactly how it goes, but it's put in a fund that is then used for discretionary spending.
I have a question. Are there cities in which photo radar is used more than others? And do you know at all where Edmonton sits on that?
I don't actually know. I haven't looked into this at all. I believe Edmonton is higher than other cities in terms of, both anecdotal and...
Yeah, because I know there are cities...
I'm pretty sure I've seen that somewhere.
I know that there are cities that do not use photo radar at all. And it does seem, from the amount of talk about it and from just what I hear around, that Edmonton seems to be one of the higher users of photo radar.
That seems to be it. Now, granted, in terms of applying traffic laws and catching speeders specifically, there is kind of different bang for your buck and different things cost different.
Okay, that sounds like a segue.
Yeah. And automated photo radar definitely kind of ties into that.
Okay.
All right. So looking at the numbers, the cheapest way is just a sign, obviously.
Yeah,
you just throw a sign down that says, slow down, don't kill children. Mm-hmm. And that's your cheapest way. Going up from there, they have what they call pace cars. And then you have the speed displays, which you've probably seen around. These are the ones that measure your speed and display it and try to get you to slow down.
If you go high enough, they say, too fast. They don't even give you a speed if you go more than 10 kilometers over.
Yeah.
At least the one over by West Edmonton Mall does that. It's I believe the speed limit there is 50 or 60. And if you go to 10 kilometers over, then it doesn't give you an actual number. It just says too fast.
To try to prevent people from getting the high scores?
I believe so.
Yeah. The one up the hill here on 105, it flashes whenever you go faster than the speed limit. And it flashes red when you go over 10.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I haven't gone over 10, but I've definitely walked up that hill with a few guys with the souped-up trucks that think they're so cool.
I've possibly gone over 10 on the one by West Edmonton Mall. Of course, that's also the speed traffic was going, and yada.
So then we also have, speed watches. Almost all of these are managed by, the Office of Traffic Safety, by our mind, except for the final one.
Yeah.
Then we have the community vans, which do photo radar. And then we have the unmarked vehicles are next in line in terms of price. These are all in ascending price. And then finally, we have the automated devices at intersections. These are the red light cameras and the speed cameras at the intersections, which are pricier yet, probably because of the computer systems to test each way.
Yeah, and it's a little bit more difficult because you have to take into account yellow lights and everything. You have
Yeah.
to, and you always have a little bit of leeway.
Yeah.
The most common scenario where you end up in the intersection on a red light is when you're turning left, and you enter the intersection on a green. And I'm boring everyone, so continue.
Well, I have an older car, and I appreciate this too, because in the winter when things get slick, if I'm closest to the intersection, I'm going through.
That's the safe thing to do. Safe to do that than
slide right into it.
Then lock and lose control.
Yeah. So then the most expensive one are the manned enforcements. These are the ones where the police officers directly ding you. When we talk about the money spent, photo radar, like the automated photo radar, is far cheaper than the manned enforcement, and it's also operated by a different department, right?
Okay.
Not by the police services. So that's why automated photo radar is used more, right?
Makes some sense.
But there have been arguments that actually those signs, the speed display signs, are actually better than even photo radar for getting people to slow down.
Oh, really?
Because they're mindful of it at the moment.
It's a direct link to the behavior as opposed to photo radar, where you get the ticket in the mail a week later, and then we're like, what was I doing on 11 o'clock p.m. on January the 25th?
Yeah.
Was I driving to Christian's house to record a late night podcast? No, I don't do that. Was I driving to a party? No, I don't go to parties. Was I drawing on this bit too long? No, I never do that, and my bits are always long enough.
Yeah. No, I posit that the ones in the mail do actually help. And, I mean, the stats there seem to back me up. Mm-hmm. But the way I posit it is especially for people who are chronic speeders. Because although these things do not give you any demerits, you still have to pay out. So you can get a lot of these suckers, and you just have to pay them out, but you won't actually affect your licensing, so you can still drive. Mm-hmm. However, if you start getting a lot of these, you might try to adjust your behavior so as to not get more, especially if it's, hemorrhaging your bank account.
Yeah, I've gotten a couple, and what's really annoying is I got a couple right in a row.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them was...
I think I was there for that, wasn't I?
Yeah, and one of them was, I think, literally for 6 kilometers over the speed limit. So I was a little bit salty about that.
Well, let's actually talk about all the photo radar we've gotten.
Yeah, I was going to continue talking about my story, but we could talk about that later if you want.
No, keep talking about your story.
No, you go now.
Okay. All right. So for me, I've gotten 2 or 3. I believe it was only 2. No, I've gotten 3. I've gotten 3. So I've had 2 via the automated and 1 via the police. Now, my 2 via the automated was completely my fault. I am a person that tends to try to drive the speed limit regardless. Mm-hmm. Granted, I have an old car, no cruise control, so sometimes your foot kind of feels a little heavy. But
also, your car has its own momentum.
And my car has momentum up the wazoo. But both of my tickets were going just over 60 in a 50 zone.
Okay.
On roads that I figured were 60, and it was a mistake for me to think that they were 60. So they were. I do not deny that I sped. Mm-hmm. I mean, better signage probably would have helped me a little bit.
Yeah.
But they were both on fairly major roads or roads that felt fairly wide, and I just made a mistake.
They didn't feel like rinky-dink little residential roads. Yeah, I got 2 or 3 photo radar tickets. I think 2 of them were in the exact same spot. Pretty much the exact spot. They didn't learn, but I think the second time, which really cheesed me off, was literally just 6 kilometers over. I mean, in a 50 zone, so yeah, it is proportionally some amount.
Over 10% over the limit.
Over 10% over, but still, it feels very rinky-dink, and it feels like you're not being dinged for behavior that is very unsafe.
Now, I posit part of this is due to the fact that we've had a buffer for so long. We've gotten used to that.
Yeah.
And it feels, if we never had that buffer to begin with, it might not feel the same way.
But the buffer, the 10 kilometer an hour buffer, is something that's moderately universal no matter where it's something that, very least, I heard growing up in Tofield. That's something you probably heard growing up.
Oh, yeah, no. It was expected. And I mean, that's why people get mad about it, because they thought that was written in the books and stuff. No, it was just, that's how it was done.
I realized always that was just the practice, not the actual law. There's always discretion. There's the law on how the law is applied, right? Okay, that's some time we spent on this. Let's wrap this up as soon as we can, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. But it still is a shock to get tickets.
Mm-hmm.
Actually dinged for such a small amount over.
So, yeah, that's where we sit. Now, I think it's fine. I think people should just try to drive the limit. I realize at times, especially on the white mud, it seems slow. But, the classic example, just because all the other kids are doing it doesn't mean you have to. And at least for me in an old car in the winter, I've definitely driven pretty slow on the white mud, and my car is an example as to why that's important. You just keep to the right lane, and people who want to speed will pass you in general. I mean, you have the occasional pissant that gets right on your ass and gets mad, but in general, it works.
Yeah, and I have a similar feeling because the statistics show that it does help. I would just note, especially for chronic speeders, I don't think that if you get a ticket in the mail once, it really changes your behavior all that much. I don't think it's changed my behavior all that much to get tickets in the mail, but I remember the time I got pulled over by a cop on the way mud. I just question the wisdom of having these thresholds set at such a low amount. I think perhaps something closer to 8 kilometers over rather than the 0 to 3 kilometer over buffer.
I would go percentage based myself.
Percentage based makes some sense.
10%?
10% isn't bad. Isn't terrible.
That gives you about 10 clicks around 100.
10 clicks around 100 makes sense. 5 clicks around 100 seems about right, but
5 clicks around 50, you mean?
Around 50 seems about right.
Yeah.
5 seems like not a lot. Now the statistics may I'd have to know about how much more likely you are to get in a crash, 55 versus 50, but 5 kilometers an hour does not seem like a lot.
But when you're talking residential roads, there's kids around, there's people walking, and speed drastically affects stopping distance.
It's true.
So that's one of the big reasons is you can actually 10 kilometers, I believe, is the difference between stopping in time and smacking a kid in the face with your car.
Well, it depends on how far the kid is.
True.
I mean, if the kid is a kilometer away, you can still stop.
Yes.
I am being pedantic, and I feel like we should wrap up this segment and go into our national news. What do you think about that?
I think very much so. So, any concluding thoughts?
No.
Not for me.
Okay.
Off we go. National news.
Well. So as a follow-up and in reaction to the mosque shooting and the increasing atmosphere of Islamophobia in Canada, a motion was introduced to Parliament. This motion says that the government should recognize the need to quell the increasing public climate of hate and fear. This is directly from the motion, by the way. Condemn Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, and take note of yada yada, and request that the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage should undertake a study on how the government could develop a whole-of-government approach to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia, in Canada, while ensuring a community-centered focus with a holistic response through evidence-based policymaking. Collect data to contextualize hate crime reports and to conduct needs assessment for impacted communities, and that the committee should present its findings and recommendations to the House no later than 240 calendar days from the adoption of this motion, provided that in its report the committee should make recommendations that the government may use it to better reflect the enshrined rights and freedoms in the Constitution and Acts, including the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There we go. So that was a lot of legalese right there. So, main highlights, it's that the House should condemn Islamophobia and create a committee to study how to fix it.
Yes.
One more thing. It's very important to note. This is a motion. This is non-binding. This is a kind of thing that happens all the time. Here are some examples of motions that have passed in the House. A motion to declare a month Italian Heritage Month and to recognize the contribution of Italian immigrants, Ukrainian peoples. Motions to, these are generally very non-controversial, blasé, don't accomplish a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. They are generally entirely symbolic.
Yes.
This cannot become a law.
No.
This is not going to turn into a law at all. This is a committee to look into what is Islamophobia.
And just provide recommendations.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, the reaction to this has been mixed, shall we say.
It's been controversial.
So,
Divisive.
divisive. Ooh, that's a good one.
Do we have any more words?
No, like, can't really say partisan or anything like that. Divisive is probably
Cantankerous?
Cantankerous, like old men.
Ooh.
Anyways, so going in, so that we don't drag this out forever, going into the reaction, the big one that hit the news was the Toronto Mosque, or Masjid, had a protest form around it from a group called Rise Canada. Also, so there were some other groups associated.
Yes.
And they basically went to protest this motion in particular, as well as the arrest for Eric Brazeau for speaking against Islam a couple years ago. Now, I didn't look up that specific one, but this is directly from the Facebook group's description.
Yes. So, about how many people were protesting in front of this mosque?
So, it was only about, like, a dozen people, a little over.
So, 10 to 15?
10 to 15, maybe 20. Like, if you look at the pictures, it's a ridiculously small group, and I've actually had a lot of friends look at that and be like, oh, don't you love Canada? Not that that's happening, but that there's nobody who showed up.
Yeah. Now, this was specifically in front of a mosque during prayer times, that the people that went to the mosque for prayer would see it. So it seems very, in that way, directed and very malicious in intent.
Yeah, it's aggressive. And for those of you who don't know about Islam, the prayer times are regimented. Like, you don't just go like you would maybe to a Catholic church and pray whenever you want. There's very specific times they are to pray, and they're to make it at those times, and it's a sin to miss.
Yeah.
So having it around the very specific time is playing right into that.
Yeah, it's very, very specific. So their protest and the general reaction to it, I would say, are twofold. First, and a little bit less, shall we say, conspiratorially, there are fears that this will be used to quell free speech, which again is a little bit past the mark because it is a motion.
Not a law.
It's not a law. This is to make a committee to make non-binding recommendations. Yeah. And these types of motions to make these type of committees to make these type of recommendations are generally nothing much happens of them.
Hmm. Another thing to note with it is, as you heard with the language, it does mention Islamophobia by name, but religious and racial discrimination are throughout it. Now, granted, I'm sure that's where the focus is, but that's not the entirety of it. It's not just Islamophobia only. It's, in general, religious discrimination.
There's been an uptick in anti-Semitism in North America lately. Still, even to this day, when people track the amount of hate crime, most of the hate crime is actually directed towards Jews, which is surprising because you don't hear about it that often. But it is, anti-Semitism is still around.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we should mention that kind of spurred this all in was in 2016, there was somebody associated with the mosque who did make some anti-Semitic prayers, essentially, from the front of the mosque.
Can I go back to that? Go back a sec. I said there was going to be twofold in the reaction and the backlash to that. Yeah. One of which is that the free speech is going to become illegal to criticize Islam.
Yes.
Which is not going to happen, I can tell you that right now. The other one is that it is the first step in order to enact Sharia law, which is a little bit more on the Alex Jones InfoWars side of things.
Yes.
Let's just say that. Because Sharia law does not mean what you think it means. It's very varied in interpretation.
Yeah.
And often the first rule of Sharia law is that you follow the rules of the country you're in.
Yeah.
And it's also, like, super varied. There are, just like Christian interpretations of biblical rules and laws, there's a lot of disagreement about how they work and how they are applied.
Yes. So, in general, there are laws, and they do apply to Muslims in terms of what they can and cannot do. But in terms of enacting a countrywide, no.
Yeah,
that's in very, very, very specific Muslim sects. One might even go so far as to call them cults. Believe in, like, enforcing a Sharia law countrywide in a country that you live in that doesn't all agree with Islam. But that's very few and far between. And I mean, you have your crackpot Christian groups that push to do very similar things, to be honest.
It's true. So this motion is not going to turn Canada into Saudi Arabia.
No.
At all. Let's get the facts out there right out in front. Continue about the anti-Semitic prayer.
So what happened in the mosque was somebody, I believe it sounds like it was one of the person leading prayers, basically made a supplication, a prayer, that was viewed as anti-Semitic.
An addendum to a prayer. It was added in.
Yeah. Unofficial, not through official channels.
Parenthetical, one might call it.
Yeah. So this is something that wasn't condoned by the mosque itself. It was done without its knowledge that it was going to happen beforehand. Mm-hmm. And they came right out and said, that's part of the reason why this probably happened.
Yeah.
We have disciplined. I believe the person was actually fired over this.
Yes.
So this is something that they do not support at all. I mean, this is a fairly, I don't want to say liberal, but it was a fairly accepting mosque.
A moderate
mosque in Toronto. It's not something they're going to stand behind at all.
Yeah. I mean, everybody who has been a member of a religious gathering of any sort knows that sometimes somebody up at the front says something stupid or borderline hateful. That is not uncommon, and one should not be surprised to see it happen in a Muslim community.
Yeah. You provide a platform to people, eventually somebody's going to say something
Exactly.
stupid. Yeah, so that's where this came about. Let's go into the group that organized this. This is one of the reactionary groups.
Yeah, the group that organized the protest of the specific mosque.
This group is called Rise Canada, and subtitled Defend Our Principles, Protect Our Values.
I have a very important question. Does Rise stand for anything?
I don't believe so. It sounds very much like it should be an acronym, or not an initialism, but an acronym, but no.
Let's see. Christian, let's try to come up with the acronym for RISE. Let's do it. Religious, intelligent, secular education. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh, no.
This is a bad segment. Continue.
Dear Lord, this is going to be a gone show to edit again. So Rise Canada basically says they defend Canadian values, and they say that it conflicts with the Islamic way of thinking. So when they ask them who they are, they basically talk about things they disagree with. You know, Labour minister endorses a religious book which promotes the beating of wives. I guess which religious book that is.
Probably not the Bible.
No, it is not the Bible. Yeah, they talk about that. They talk about how males and females have to be segregated, which, going back into there's Christian groups that do that, by the way.
Yeah.
And they talk about all these sort of things about what the secular things funding these religious things, where I'm sure if there were Christian things being funded, they would not talk about.
Yes.
So this is a group that basically views Islam as Sharia law coming in and damaging the human rights, and that's the mask they put on, but it's Islamophobia in a group.
Yeah, they're specifically suggesting a good model for this. What would be the proposed Quebec Values Charter, which we talked about briefly last week, which banned the wearing of the niqab and the religious head coverings of any sort in public spaces, which seems entirely ludicrous.
I would love to see the little old Mennonite ladies running around.
It's true. It's true.
Technically, that's a head covering.
It is a head covering, I mean.
Or old Catholic ladies, or...
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that's kind of where they are. They view the Islamic threat as sort of an invasion that's slowly kind of invading our culture like a disease.
A pernicious thing, yeah.
It's gonna come in and eventually... As the guy in the post office I spoke to said, soon we'll all be praying to Allah, except for me.
So going into another way Islamophobia has shown up in Canada, we have to talk about this beautiful rebel-led Freedom to Offend conference, rally, whatever.
We have to talk about the rebel again.
We have to talk about the rebel again.
Can we forget that the rebel exists?
Afterwards.
Okay.
This is directly in response to M103 again. You're going to see that probably crop up a lot in the news in the coming weeks, even though, as we said, it literally does nothing.
Nothing!
Hashtag not a law. They basically hosted this thing, which had a bunch of big names show up from the conservative leadership race, some of whom we covered, some of whom we did not, but basically the bunch of the social conservatives and Kelly Leitch showed up.
Well, Chris Alexander, Kelly Leitch, Pierre Lemieux, and Brad Trost.
Brad Trost.
Yeah, I nailed it.
So these all showed up at the rally here to...
No, where was the rally?
The rally was in
Canadian
Christian College.
Canadian Christian College, and that is in Toronto?
Yes, and it's a small, very conservative, as you might have guessed, Christian college. I don't even know if it's accredited or not. But yeah, they hosted this. They were originally going to host in a hotel, and I'm not going into the hearsay of why they had to move, but they moved. And they moved here, and they held this conference, which had a lot of people actually in it, which is a little more scary.
So this reaction is kind of bonkers. It's one of the more innocuous statements that you can make legislatively, and the reaction has been huge. 4 out of there's like 15 gazillion conservative leadership candidates, but 4, a significant amount, showed up to this rally. As well, of all the major candidates, I believe only one said he would vote for this motion. Everybody else seems to be arguing over the semantics of what Islamophobia means.
Even though it's just a specific religious discrimination.
Yeah, it's a specific thing that has a specific definition. So, even though the Parliament has condemned Islamophobia before, last year, now it's a huge debate about what does Islamophobia mean? And we should just remove that and just condemn religious discrimination and racial discrimination in general. Despite the fact that this, not a bill, a motion, did not come out of thin air. This came out of the very specific populist hate and fear that we're getting in North America, and in more specifically, the terrorist acts that we're starting to see.
Yeah, such as in the mosque in Montreal.
Exactly. More mild threats against mosques and Muslim peoples have happened throughout Canada. Just very recently in the States, East Indian engineer was shot in Kansas. Was shot by a man yelling, "Get out of my country." The reports from that incident are that this man was thought by the white man who shot him to be Muslim. So this is a thing that is kind of pervasive in culture right now, and this motion is targeted specifically to that for a reason.
Yeah. Okay, so recently, I should disclose this. Disclose it, it's not a bad thing. I went to an open house at the mosque last Sunday. And it actually ties in very well. I didn't do it intentionally with this, just like they didn't intentionally hold the open house. They've been planning this for weeks and months.
Yeah.
But it was basically the imams went there, made a brief presentation, answered questions, and you got to basically mill around and talk with Muslims about their faith, recent converts as well as people who've been Muslim for quite some time.
Yeah.
And one of the things they definitely wanted to dispel was any sort of inkling of wanting to enact Sharia law. And I mean, this guy, the Imam, is from Egypt. He's not like Canadian born. You can think, oh, he's been in Canada for ages. No, he's from Egypt. His native language is Arabic. He's like, You're Muslim's Muslim in a lot of people's minds, I'm sure. And he's like, no, that's not our purpose. You know, he did talk about, like, their views on gender and their views on, different faiths and such.
Yeah.
And holding that, like a lot of Muslims, they believe that Christians and Jews are people of the book.
Yeah.
And should be respected for such. They don't believe they're Muslim, but they believe they're kind of on the right path, basically.
Exactly. And that is a attitude that you get from some Christians as well. That we are all Abrahamic faiths. Me and Christian are both Christian peoples.
Yeah, of the Christian faith, you could say.
There you go. Yeah,
there you go. That's a less clunky way.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I went just to try to bridge that gap as well as just to learn more.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't get all my questions answered, and there's definitely some touchy subjects. The whole Sunni Shia thing, I've always liked to be a little more knowledgeable, but that's a very contentious kind of...
Yeah.
Because the whole thing started off with there was violence between the two, and there's like bad blood.
Yeah.
But when it all comes down to it, the idea of a lot of modern Islam and a lot of modern Muslims is the self-ameliorization. It's to become a better person in and of yourself, for your own personal salvation, and what others do is up to them. I mean, Islam isn't even heavily evangelical because they have ideas in the Quran that the truth will just be evident. Yeah. And they don't actually, that's why you don't have Muslims knocking door to door. They just let it speak for itself.
Yeah. And, I've even heard that most of Sharia as a concept in most Muslim circles, most of that is about self.
It's like jihad as well. Jihad gets co-opted by some militant groups for a holy war kind of crusade-like context.
Yeah.
But to most Muslims, they use the word jihad, but it means the personal struggle, like your struggle against sin and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, one thing that I would like to recommend people do about it, as well as, learning more about Muslims and reaching out to people around you that are Muslims for your own benefit, really, is that it's good to research who your representative is, who your most local MP and MLE are, research what their views on this motion are, even though it is, again, not something where much is going to come of it. I think it still is important to stand with the Muslim people of this country against this hate.
Yes, no matter what you believe, you do not deserve to have your place of worship invaded by people shouting against you or anything like that. You don't deserve to be worried about your life while in your place of worship. Things like this. So speaking out against this, even though the motion cannot actually do anything, is a very powerful step, I'd say. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's important to contact your representatives to let them know that either that you stand with them in supporting this motion, or if their opinion is not known or on record, to maybe influence that, as well as to let them know they represent you. Mm-hmm. And so they have to hear what you have to say. Yeah. And if you're mad at them for what they're doing, specifically in opposing this motion, as most of the Conservative Party, except for, that's only one I heard was Michael Chong, who's one of the more moderate...
Is probably the most moderate.
For sure, the most moderate leadership candidate.
Yes.
Yeah, he's the only one who supports this motion. Mm-hmm. The rest of the Conservative Party has opposed it. In fact, I would say that this has become the raison d'etre of the Conservative Party.
Raison d'etre.
Okay, I thought I was being really clever. Between this and the Niqab ban for citizenship and the barbaric practices hotline, they're kind of returning to the same stuff that lost them last election. So we need to tell them that this is going to lose them the next election, because they will listen to that.
Yeah. Especially if you're conservative and you disagree with this, you can use this as an opportunity to try to get your party, what you'd see, back on track.
Yep. Back towards, let's just say, the Harper-esque conservative values.
Small government, low taxation,
and away from the Trump-esque conservative policies.
Yes.
Which are, I'm not even sure.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered that very fully.
We have covered our first two stories in way more depth than you will ever need.
All right, buckle up, kids. We're going to go into international news. So, this is fairly breaking news, and I don't think anyone has heard about it. But the news is simply this. South Sudan is undergoing a famine.
Okay.
Now, South Sudan is another one of the countries, like Yemen, that is undergoing a lot of internal turmoil. There are basically two groups in a major civil war. There's kind of infighting amongst a lot of tribal forces in there, but there's two main groups. So one of the groups is called the Merle tribe, and this is analogous with the rebels in Yemen. It's the underdog kind of group. Mm-hmm. And this is the group in the north end of the country.
The north end of South Sudan.
North end of South Sudan, which only became a country in 2011, or recognized as a country.
Okay.
And the Nuers, which is another tribal group. Now, as the stories are very conflicting because tribal conflict, but it sounds like the Merles have been encroaching on other areas and stealing livestock, women, and land.
Okay.
And the Nuers, according to the stories, are basically fighting back. But this has turned into an all-out civil war, basically, at this point.
The Nuers have even released a statement, this was back a while ago, that they wanted to wipe out the entire Merle tribe.
Yeah. As a way of bringing security to their cattle. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a big deal. And one of the big problems with this is that it has interrupted a lot of farming, and it has interrupted a lot of herding, and the local people have actually been forced to rely on kind of a hunter-gatherer sort of lifestyle, which there is far too many people to accommodate.
Yeah.
This has actually caused a man-made famine. Now, granted, the weather with El Nino last winter did cause some issues with the growing season.
Some drought,
but a lot of countries have been able to get through it fine. I mean, farmers, I think, in general, expect droughts and plan for them in general. However, given the civil war that's going on, that has not happened. And then on top of that, the fact that the farms have been basically left barren a lot of the time, we have basically arrived at a famine. Now, a famine isn't just a word you throw a lot around. There's actually a definition.
See, I did not know this before we started researching this, so this is good to know.
Now, there's basically 3 criteria for a famine. The first criterion is that at least 20% of the households in the area have to face extreme food shortages with a limited ability to cope. Being a hunter-gatherer, essentially, would definitely hold on to this. The acute malnutrition rates have to exceed 30%. That's a third, pretty much. That's incredibly high.
That's 3 in 10.
Yes. And then finally, the death rate exceeds 2 people per day per 10,000, or 1 per 5,000. And that is a staggering death. This is per day, mind you. 1 per 5,000 per day people are dying, as well as all these other horrible malnutrition and lack of food resources. This is the first time a famine has been declared in 6 years. Now, a lot of times the famines have been localized around these Central African republics, as well as there was one in North Korea. But by and large, yes, these areas are more heavily hit with famines, but this is a very extreme scenario that hasn't happened for a long time.
Yeah.
So one may ask then, what are we doing about it? Well, the Canadian government is basically just supporting NGOs in this scenario. A lot of what's going on, there has been no real interventions into the tribal conflict or the civil war. It's just been delivering aid. However, the current leader of South Sudan has been accused of blocking aid to the northern kind of central region, which is where the rebels are generally occupying. Mm-hmm. And, has been blocking aid, and that's the area that's been hit with the famine the hardest because of the war-torn nature of it. So he's recently then come out and said, no, I will allow things to get through, but that's been aggravating the situation as well, is that aid has not been able to reach the areas. Now, granted, they've been doing airdrops and other things, but in general, aid is really all these people are relying on. There's not really a ton of people even on the ground, I believe.
And it's tough to get the aid to the areas affected because there are both government and tribal forces that may be preventing some of the aid from getting there.
Mm-hmm. So, the UN Secretary General, in terms of an estimate for the amount of aid, said about $4.4 billion in aid is needed by international donors at the end of March to avert a catastrophe. So this thing is bad, and it's going to get worse unless people, organizations, governments step in. There are some generous pledges, but only about $90 million has been received so far, which is like a fifth of what they need.
A fifth? That's way less than a fifth, man.
Oh, sorry, a 50th of what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is going to be a very bad situation, and I do not foresee this not getting incredibly worse as time goes on. Especially being that this is man-caused, so the people on the ground being able to help ameliorate this is going to be far less than when it's not man-caused and the people on the ground are actually trying to fight the famine as best they can.
Yeah. So we're just kind of telling you this story just so to raise awareness about this issue and so that you guys can raise awareness, donate if you can. Just let more people know about this so that we can do more to help the people there.
Mm-hmm. And this is further evidence that anytime we talk about one of these civil wars in one of these countries, or even just general turmoil, that this can lead to far more overarching problems. Yemen, which we just talked about last week, has major food shortage issues and is definitely approaching famine levels if things keep going as they are.
Yep.
Somalia and Nigeria are both in dire straits as well. Before the year's out, we might end up with 4 countries in famine instead of just the one. So this is another reason why these civil wars, as much as, you can't really go in there and help, but being aware that these are actually not just, a bunch of people fighting and then everyone else is just kind of doing their own thing. Everyone in the country is being affected by these civil wars.
For sure.
So we didn't talk very heavily about this. Now there is kind of a little more information here and there, and you can go online and look up pictures, which is probably your best way of connecting with the people there. Yeah, there's not a whole lot more to say. It's just this is mostly just an awareness section. It's going to be rather short, but we just felt like this is a story that not really any coverage. I mean, the only way we found this out, at least for me, was I was specifically looking for stories instead of just passively seeing what came by.
Yeah, I saw it on cbc.ca once, on one day, which you compare that to, I think they've ran about 5 days of Milo coverage.
Yeah. Another reason why I'm kind of a little detested but the Milo coverage is so heavy, because there are these things that are massively more important, let's say.
For sure.
So, but yeah, that's just a little bit of segment to be aware. I mean, you guys can feel free to find Red Cross, other ways of donating.
Yep, for sure.
But,
let's move on to something a little bit lighter.
Yeah, let's move on to something light like Steam.
Oh boy, that's a pun and a segue all in the way, same thing.
Woo! Alright, so I'm gonna open this up and just say what Steam is, because I'm assuming most of our viewers, all 4 of you now, maybe 5. Do you think we hit 5 yet?
I don't know if we've hit 5 regular viewers. Ooh. My wife doesn't even listen to this. Wifey, if you've gotten to this point in the episode, let me know, okay? Because...
the code word is Scorpion.
Okay, the code word is Scorpion. Let's do that.
So, Steam is a game service created by Valve, the creators of the Half-Life series, the Portal game, which is, I think, a little more in the public eye, and...
Left 4 Dead?
Left 4 Dead is another very popular game.
Team Fortress 2.
Team Fortress 2. Valve has made a lot of games. Steam is their game delivery service.
The storefront.
The storefront, yes. And this basically enables them to take games that other producers have made and allow people to be able to play them. Now, you're not buying a direct copy. It's a little different with Steam. You're kind of buying access to a game, and if Steam ever goes down, you lose your library, kind of. For the vast majority of games. There are some that you do actually download and have in...
Well, they're all downloaded to your computer.
Yes, but they all need Steam to run.
Yes, exactly.
So, most of them. This is still a service that's very tied to itself. Well, they opened up, and this was... how many years ago did the Greenlight start?
Who knows? Years ago.
Years ago, they started a service called Greenlight. And this sounded like a really good service on the idea. What they would do is they would allow indie developers with any sort of producer or any back end like that, just a video game developer, a programmer, to create a game and put it up, and people could look at the game, look at a little trailer they maybe did, and vote if they wanted to actually see this game become a full-fledged game on Steam.
Now, it's important to note that Steam was also accepting submissions directly to them as well.
Yes.
And published a lot of games of varying quality that you could just submit to Valve for approval. But this was another one with significantly less cost of getting your games onto Steam.
And it's less cost, but there's also less oversight.
Yes.
And so when we submitted games specifically, the games had to go through a screening process. This was almost a public opinion screening process.
Exactly.
So what ended up happening is, and if you look up best of Steam Greenlight trailers on YouTube, all sorts of...
or just Steam Greenlight if you don't want to see something just besides Jim Sterling's
content.
Content! There we go!
But a lot of schlock and awfulness made it onto Steam this way. Now, granted, there are still plenty of good games on Steam, and I'm sure through Greenlight, actually I've seen it, there have been some very good games being greenlit and being produced into full-fledged games from very basic ideas.
But there was stuff that was hateful and bordered on hate speaks. I believe there was a game called Kill the Other F Words.
Yeah.
There was stuff that was violating intellectual property by having, cartoon characters from various properties that they did not own or give the rights to.
Yeah, you also had problems with what they call acid flips, which are technically legal, but they just take a lot of already pre-done content, max it together into a game, and try to make a quick buck. And these things, although legal, are quality-wise horrible.
Even worse, you had some people taking the pre-built games from the Unity, which is a software engine, and they have some pre-sample games in order to build on that. Well, some people weren't building on that. They were just taking the sample game, buying it from Unity, and then putting it right on the store without even, mashing assets together into a game. Yeah. It was just literally the asset is the game.
Yeah. So you had a lot of garbage making it onto Steam through this, and they've been lambasted for a long time now about it. Well, the news just hit, and Steam is discontinuing Greenlight. Which, although might not sound like a big news to people who aren't in the gaming sphere, this is actually fairly substantial news. Because
specifically in the PC gaming,
real gaming sphere.
In the independent PC gaming scene.
Well, where the real gamers hang out.
This is the real gamers play only Firelight?
Firewatch?
Firewatch!
It's a good game. By the way, kids, go play it. Yeah, they discontinued it, and they're starting up something called Steam Direct.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Yes, they're talking about evolving this. So they said from Greenlight they learned some things, and they called it a stepping stone. You know, your classic corporate formula kind of thing. But they saw the two problems: improving the entire pipeline for bringing new content to Steam, and finding new ways to connect customers with the type of content they wanted. Which doesn't exactly speak to the quality issues, but underlying, that's what we're really trying to sort out here. So this is basically a way of, for a higher cost, getting your game greenlit on Steam. So there'll be more quality buffers. It's still a direct way of getting your game onto Steam, and it's different than the normal submission route.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like an in-between, kind of between Greenlight and the submission protocols, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So what they're making developers do now is there's a bunch of paperwork and a bunch of verification required for setting up this. They call it going to be similar to setting up for a bank account. So you're going to, Greenlight, you had to do very little to be able to put something on Greenlight, whereas this, you have to actually jump through a whole bunch of hoops. Now, this might make it more of a pain. Mm-hmm. But what it will do is try to help filter out some of this junk content, some of the illegal content, whether it be for hate speech or for IP violations.
Yeah. Well, because there was a lot of abuses not only in the content put on Greenlight trailers, but there was also a little bit of a cottage industry of mobilizing people to vote for things regardless of quality.
Yeah.
Exploiting the trading card system so that you were essentially paying people for voting on your game. There was all sorts of PR, quote-unquote, companies that basically gave out free game codes in exchange for people to vote on specific Greenlight products, therefore getting them greenlit. This caused some very not deserving games to be greenlit by the Greenlight process, just through very insidious, essentially, cheating, ballot stuffing, essentially.
Yeah, breaking the system. Basically buying votes from people for perks. And I'm very glad that they've kind of done away with that.
Yeah, that specifically will be done away with because there will not be this public aspect, which, if anybody has spent any time around the internet, knows that there's always a danger when you open up voting to the public.
Yeah. And what's the number one rule? Don't open the comments section. Like, voting is very much the same.
Yeah, especially if you can fill in your own submissions. I've known many stories, like, whenever, like, Mountain Dew opens...
The Mountain Dew is the best.
It opens, like, Mountain Dew, or anybody is like, name a new flavor. We have this new blue flavor of Mountain Dew. What are we gonna name it? The internet always says, because trolls get involved, that it always should be called Nazi N-word, F-word.
No.
Or Hitler did nothing wrong.
Hitler did nothing wrong was the Mountain Dew example, which is a troll thing. It's kind of funny that the company did not see that that's what would happen.
Yeah.
That's what happened when you employ internet voting, is it's not fair. Another reason why online voting should not be a thing in Canadian electoral things, but yeah.
That issue is dead, buried.
That issue has been so dead.
It's dead, buried, put into a coffin. The concrete slab has gone over the coffin. The dirt has gone on top of the coffin. There's a headstone there. It looks very nice. It's in a cemetery. I think the cemetery is somewhere in Ottawa.
And the NDP are standing around it mourning it still.
There you go. Wow, that was almost a good bit for once. High five! Yeah! Anyway, back to Steam. Yeah, so it's good to see it go. It would be interesting to see whether this actually creates quality control so that games that are on Steam actually deserve to be sold in a Steam service. Yeah. The biggest PC way that people get games on PC is Steam. For pretty much all games, you are going to be downloading off Steam, unless it's an EA game because they have their own delivery service. But for pretty much every other game, you're going to get it on Steam.
Yeah, and we'll just have to see how much this affects the indie game market and people who don't have any sort of producers or anything, because this will cause more hoops, and there will be a charge, they will charge you, which is one of the ways they're trying to filter out bad content. As much as it sucks that, you have to pay to get into somewhere, it's a way of stopping just any Joe Schmo.
Yeah. The cost they have not decided on yet. They have given a wide range of 100 to 5,000. I would say that a good range. It was 100 before to submit your game to Greenlight.
Yeah.
But I believe that was a one-time cost, and you could, as a studio, submit many Greenlight submissions with that cost.
Yes.
So that created things where people would just spam the Greenlight system and make it unnavigable.
Unnavigable.
Yes. Something like that. The Flight of the Unnavigable it was my favorite 80s movie. Oh man, our jokes are great today. Anyway, so 100 seems a little bit low, and 5,000 seems way too high. I would say the right number would be somewhere in the 2 to 500 range.
Yeah, I would aim around 500. Yeah, as it says, this will all have to come and see. This is kind of breaking news. There hasn't been much reaction to this. I mean, Reddit's kind of talked about it a little, but really what it's coming down to is this is an announcement. Greenlight hasn't been taken down yet. Yeah. When it does get taken down, I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about it, because some people who didn't hear about this are going to be a little surprised.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But
yeah, I think it's about time we should wrap it up. I think we've taken too much of people's time already.
I think this episode is a testament to people's patience.
It is. I think we should keep on this bit where we talk on longer.
No, let's just end it proper.
No, let's not end it proper. We need it.
No, let's end it proper.
I think we need to keep on talking. I think we need to keep on talking.